Assalamualaikum and a very good evening. We are from Group Pentagon. We present about EMS 14001, which is about environmental management system. Okay, so first thing first, we're going to discuss about chemical storage management that consists of key responsibilities, legal framework, hazard identification and communication, chemical hazard, siting and design of storage area, and lastly, warehouse management. Okay, so first thing first, key responsibilities. Okay, firstly, the warehouse employer or owner. He provides and maintains plants and systems so that they are safe. Um, he planned for the safe use, operation, handling, storage, and transportation of the plant. He also provides information, instruction, training, and supervision for his employees. And lastly, he provide and maintain working environment for his employees. Okay, secondly is the supplier or owner of the chemical. Competence to undertake the storage required with the suitability of the warehouse. He give advance notice of the warehouse keeper of the requirement. He also ensure that the warehouse keeper acknowledges the information on hazards, safe handling and instruction to be followed. Lastly, he ensures that emergency arrangements are adequate for inspection. So next we go to the warehouse keeper or employees. They take reasonable care for the safety and health of himself and another person. Um, Cooperate with his employer or any other person in the discharge of any duty or requirement imposed on the employer. Other than that, he wear or use any protective equipment or clothing provided by the employer for the purpose of preventing the risk. Lastly, he comply with any instruction given by his employer. Okay, next we go through the legal framework. First is the occupational safety and health classification, packaging and labeling of hazardous chemicals regulation 1997. So it states that suppliers duties to classify chemicals according to their hazardous properties, pack into appropriate containers, label the container with prescribed information and accompany the chemical with the chemical safety data sheet or material safety data sheet. Secondly, the occupational safety and health use and standard of exposure of chemical hazardous to health regulations 2000. Employer must identify chemical hazardous to health, comply with the permissible exposure limits, label and label chemical hazardous to health, provide information, instruction and training, monitor employee exposure at the workplace, conduct health surveillance, post of warning signs and keep record. Lastly, occupational safety and health control of industrial major accident hazard regulations 1996. Premises where specified quantities of chemicals are stored or used. These quantities compared against the threshold quantity of each the chemicals will determine the category of the premises, whether they are under major hazard installation or non-major hazard installation. So next we go to hazard identification and communication. First thing first about chemical safety data sheet. The purpose of a chemical safety data sheet is to provide information needed to allow for the safe handling of hazardous chemical. An acceptable chemical safety data sheet for a chemical should describe the chemical's identity, relevant health hazard information, and precautions for use and safe handling information. So next we go to classification, labeling and relabeling of chemical. First, chemicals to be stored should be classified, labeled, and or relabeled as per the occupational safety and health. The details on which containers are to be labeled and relabeled refer to the occupational safety and health. Okay, for the chemical register, the employer of the workplace which have the chemical hazardous to health and should maintain a chemical register. The chemical register consists of the chemical inventory and the chemical safety data sheets for all the listed chemicals. That's all from me.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. Next, I will tell you about chemical hazard. There is 5 chemical hazard that we usually found in a chemical storage. So for the first one is explosive. Explosive is actually a chemical that explode that might be explode because of flame or sensitive to the shock. So this type of chemical, we will usually store it far from any other chemical at a different building to minimize the impact if explosion occur. So for oxidizing chemical hazard, is a chemical that will oxidize or produce exothermic reaction when contact with other chemical. And for this type of chemical will be stored far from the combustion chamber. Okay, so next is flammable. Flammable is a chemical that easy to catch fire with a little amount of heat, including the friction. It doesn't matter if it's solid, liquid, or gas. For the flammable chemical, we will store it far from heat or below room temperature if needed. Okay, so next is a toxic chemical hazard. It is a chemical that can be harmful by contact, ingestion, or inhalation. Chemical will be isolated and stored in a good ventilation in a secondary container. So next is a corrosive. Corrosive most is acid and alkali, and it will be stored in a special container that resists to the corrosion. Okay, so next is a seating and design of chemical storage area. So seating, the chemical storage area was built far from high population area, far from water sources and external sources of hazard, and actually the storage area must free from holding. Next is security. The storage also must be protected from a trespasser by building secure fence and also around the storage area. The storage also can be installed with a CCTV to protect the place and guarded 24 hours. For the site layout, actually chemical storage area, the building must be separate with another building, and site must also has precaution step. For example, like firewall to make sure the site is safe. And the site must has their own road to transport material from outside and storage area to the lab. They cannot use a usual road to transport the chemical. So next is outdoor storage. Chemical that store at the outdoor are exposed to heat and need to has a good ventilation system. The storage must be surfaced with good heat or water resistant to make sure the soil and water are not contaminated if a leakage happen. And for design of warehouse building, actually the storage must be divided into a several compartment to store different type of chemical according to their hazard level. The chemical storage must be locked and must has emergency plan like emergency exit, and the warehouse must be built with a quality and according to chemical requirement material. So as you can see, this is example of good storage area for chemical. Okay, so next is warehouse management. So when you build a chemical storage warehouse area, we actually need to do a warehouse management, which is including controlling chemical hazard, first aid facilities, training for the person in charge in the warehouse, chemical separation from a different chemical hazard, waste disposal, spill and leakage, warehouse operation and storage plan. So that's all for me. I will pass to my friend to continue this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, last but not least, I will explain about chemical waste management. So there are 4 steps, all of them, which are waste determination, waste minimization, and third, how to manage the waste, and last but not least, how to dispose the chemical waste properly. So in the first step, which is waste determination, there are 2 types of waste, which are solid waste and hazardous waste. So in solid waste, it is a solid, semi-solid, liquid, sludge, or contained gas that is no longer needed or to be discarded. So this is the example picture of the solid waste. In hazardous waste, it is a solid waste that is listed by the EPA, and it is exhibit 1 or more of the 4 characteristics below: ignitable, toxic, reactive, and corrosive. So for example, like we can see in this figure, so we can determine in the waste bottle that label, poison or toxic, flammable, explosive, corrosive, radioactive, and biohazardous infection. Okay, and the second step is waste minimization. So what kind of the waste minimization? So it is include source reduction practice that reduce or eliminate waste generation. Environmentally, we call as recycling practice. So what is source reduction? It is any practice that reduce quantity or toxicity of pollutant entering a waste stream prior to recycling, treatment, and disposal. For example, like maintenance, equipment or technology modification and reformulation. So what kind of recycling? Include the use, reuse or reclamation of waste residual that may be designated hazardous waste or material in hazardous waste. In how can we minimize the waste? First thing first, we must order only enough amount of chemical, avoid storing excess chemical, share unneeded chemical, and last but not least, keep chemical properly labeled. And why we have to minimize the waste? Because minimization of waste can help in reduce the cost, increase productivity and process efficiency, improve workplace safety, and improve environmental quality. So in the third step is how can we manage the waste? So there are two kind of the in order to manage the waste, which are satellite accumulation and condition of waste container. In the satellite accumulation area, all container and hazardous waste must be stored in designated area, such as satellite accumulation area (SAA). And the SAA must be established in area where the waste under direct control of the individual who generated the waste. So this is the example of the SAA label, and it is the place where SAA place generated. And the second, we also must consider the condition of waste container. The container must be in a good condition, no rust, pinhole, dents, leaks, or chemical deposit. Container cap must be free of cracks and sealed tightly. Container also cannot leak if invert, and the container must be kept closed. For example, like this picture, there is no rust, no rust, pinhole, dents, leaks, and the container keep closed and sealed tightly. So last but not least, how to dispose the waste properly. There is two procedures which are pre-disposal and disposal procedure. In pre-disposal procedure, we have to sort by compatibility of the waste, and the waste must be in approved container, and the container must be in tightened cap and ensure the contents are properly identified. In disposal procedure, we first move to the SAA, satellite accumulative area, and then we call the HWC to pick up the number. And lastly, we complete form and ensure labeling information. For example, like this picture, we label the waste and the container. So that's all from our group.
For the last part, I will explain about PDCA cycle for our chemical storage management system. Okay. First is P. P stand for the plan. Okay. For the plan, we will plan the safety in the lab, storage, how to we storage the chemical, the rule and regulation in the laboratory, hazard review of the chemicals, and also we want to plan how to training our worker on the safety aspect. Okay. Second is do. Do is we want to understand the laboratory safety, how to arrange of the chemical all at self-based on its property, safety signs, and also the safe working area for the lab worker. Okay. For the third one is a check. In this check, what we will doing a checking on the hazard management plan and safety plan review, regulatory inspection, chemical inventory report, and also the self-inspection. And for the last one, X. We will X on the safety commit, regulatory impacts analysis, accident investigation, chemical hazardous data analysis. I think that's all from our group, which is Pentagon. Thank you for listening our group presentation.